morning, everybody. Now that you're here, I'm getting nervous because it's a clinical subject, and of course I may be wrong in certain places. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Because after all, we are philosophy people, and usually, we philosophers think that we don't need to concern ourselves with the facts. And it's because of that we make mistakes. So that's why I request you in case I make a mistake. Although my husband's a doctor, but he being a doctor doesn't help. Like knowing the facts, I won't know as much as what you people know. So I may be mistaken at places, or I may give less information. Not may, I will definitely be giving less information. I request that you add to it. Because after all, this is not a presentation session, it's more of a workshop in which the main idea is that we all give our views to the teacher or the professor who is having the project at hand. And our views will really help the teacher to go ahead with the project. If it is just a presentation, if I just speak a few things, that will be just a few thoughts of mine which will not really help the concerned teachers to do the project. I am myself a part of the project. So my request is that I would be speaking less and I would be expecting more of reactions and additions from all of you, and mainly from Dr. Shiv Kumar, right?
Yes, Shiva.
Shiva.
Yeah, you can call me Shiva.
Okay, Shiva. Dr. Shiva. So I request that you please add the things that I'm missing out.
I'm sure that.
No, I will be missing out on a lot of things. I'm aware of it. See, now we are today beginning our discussion on bioethics. I think most of you have studied bioethics at college level. So I won't be going into too much of basics, but still I'll just mention a few things which should be basic for those of you who already know. And then I'll go on to the main issue. The topic is ethics, the topic of the project. The project title is Ethics of Clinical Disputes with respect to the terminally ill. Now, when we formulated this project, because the project is mine and Professor Navlis. Now, when we formulated this project, what we had in mind is that the terminally ill cases, firstly, we are not sure whom to define as terminally ill. Because as you know that someone whom you may not call terminally ill, I as a family member might consider as terminally ill. And someone whom you may consider as terminally ill, the family member might feel that no, this is a case that can really be, the person can recover, or I wouldn't like to call this case as a terminally ill. So we need to define even the concept of terminally ill. And now when I had this project in mind, or when we had, myself and Dr. Nande, what we were having in mind is that when it comes to terminally ill patients, it's not only the medical fraternity who decides. Because these doctors, they will tell us that this is the case. Now they usually inform the family members that this is the thing, and then whether you want further treatment, what type of treatment you want, what exactly is required. So they usually discuss and disclose the information either to the patient, or preferably, if I'm not mistaken, you prefer disclosing to the family first when it is a very serious illness. And then the family decides whether to give this information to the patient or not. Now when this is done, the question of informed consent does not arise. Usually when there is active intervention, informed consent is required. The patient or the family members have to give an informed consent whether active intervention can take place or not. But when it comes to disclosure or non-disclosure of information, at that time, there is no such thing as informed consent being required. Now, what I had in mind is that these are various issues wherein only the philosophical community or the medical community cannot really take a decision. Because even a person may be a complete atheist all his life. When he is having a terminal illness, you see the patient, either a religious person becoming totally an atheist, or normally an atheist trying to become, when everything else fails, he wants to fall back on religion. He wants to fall back on prayer and healing. Everybody tells him, "ठीक है, I know you don't believe in God. You may not be believing in God, but जहाँ इतनी चीजें try करनी, एक और तो try कर लो." Why don't you try prayer healing? And this is the autonomy of the patient. The doctors will respect the autonomy of the patient if he wants the religious considerations. In fact, they are required. In UK, I don't know whether we have it in India, but in UK they have proper guidelines how to treat patients who are, say, Sikhs, who are Muslims, who are Hindus. They have proper guidelines. I don't think we have it in India.
We don't have it in
We
that
don't
form.
have it in that form the way in which they have it in UK. They have proper guidelines as to how these patients have to be when it comes to surgery, when it comes to treatment, and when it comes to terminally ill, definitely those guidelines are given. Now those guidelines which are given to the doctors, they would normally follow them, but still when it comes to terminally ill cases, where it is America, they follow the utilitarian principle. Now we all in philosophy department know that when we talk of ethics, it's utilitarian principle or Kantian principle, usually. There are many other theories, but what we generally go by is the utilitarian theory. Is this going to be useful? Then it is right. If it's not going to be useful, it's not right. So is it going to be useful? Is it going to be worthwhile treating this patient? If it's not going to be worthwhile, if it's going to be costing too much and the patient may recover, may not recover, let's not treat the patient. That type of considerations are there in America. But when it comes to Spain, when it comes to the other European countries, it's not the utilitarian considerations. What they want is some specific, what should I say, absolute principles. I'll come to this after a minute. These are the 4 basic bioethic principles. I'll come to this a little later. Now, I was talking about American bioethics is utilitarian. European bioethics, Spanish bioethics, is based on the absolute principles. Now, which are these absolute principles? These absolute principles that are taken by the European doctors are the principles of justice. I think that point has been missed out by mistake. It is justice and non-maleficence. The absolute principles are justice and non-maleficence. Now I go back to the earlier slide. There are 4 basic principles of bioethics. We cannot go by Kantian moral ethics, which talks about absolute principles. The law of universality, that does not work. In fact, that was the biggest problem which the doctors were facing. If they turned to the philosophers, they would say, no, these are the absolute principles. Preserve life at any cost. Sanctity of life principle. And see whether you can universalize this. Or if you turn to Mill, he would say it is utilitarian principle. But these principles do not work in medicine. Especially when they are having so much of new advancements. They are able to prolong life. It's possible for them to prolong life by artificial methods. Then it is possible for them to end life prematurely. Not prematurely, but if a person is in pain, then they can end life. There are so many other factors that have come up. And when they would turn to us philosophers, we would shy away from giving specific responses. So it was very difficult, and there was always a, like a stop of communication. Finally, the new principles of bioethics emerged. These are the principles of autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. And we find that the doctors and the philosophers and the common man and the religious leaders, they all go together. We have discussions like this, what we are having today. Because it's not possible that when a patient is terminally ill, last stage, last 48 hours, and that time the doctor cannot hold a conference and decide what is to be done and what is not to be done. So it has to be under normal circumstances that such conferences have to be held, discussions have to be held, and we make some decisions as to how to handle these terminally ill cases. So the principles on which we base bioethics, or how the doctor should treat the patients, not medical considerations, they know, but there are so many options available. Whether which particular option they should take, it is based on these principles. The cultural tradition influences attitudes. Now I am going to the terminally ill cases. Now when we talk about terminally ill cases, as I was telling you, culture and religion play a very, very important role. We cannot have only medical considerations, we cannot have only philosophical considerations. Now philosophically, if you're buried or you're burnt or your body is thrown to birds, it doesn't make a difference because the body is dead. But each one of us would like that our body is disposed of according to our religious tradition. Even when a Christian is married to a Sikh or a Hindu, always when it comes to the dead body there are clashes. I know of a doctor very recently in US wherein he expired, his wife was a Christian, she said we are going to be burying the body. But his wish was that it should be burnt because he was a Sikh. He lived with her all through his life, but towards the end he wants his own. She and the son refused to, जैसे कहते हैं ना आग लगाना. Now here in the US you don't have a thing like that. But here, even now here we've started in India, it's an electric crematory. So button press करना होता है. The son refused to press the button. Wife refused to come for the funeral. She said it is against my tradition. But we have to respect the autonomy of the concerned patient. Now you can see, is there any philosophical problem in this? Burn karo ya jalao ya dabao ya birds ko dalo. But here what matters is cultural or religious tradition. Similarly, when it comes to terminally ill cases, we cannot just go by philosophy alone or medicine alone. We have to consider the religious and the cultural affiliations. Sometimes even religious affiliations are affected by culture. But I think in a place like India, we are more bound by the religious affiliations than the culture. Because by culture, what I mean is, suppose you are a Christian, within Christianity also there are so many types, so they will be having different. यहाँ हमारा ऐसे नहीं है. We generally have Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Jain, अलग-अलग traditions, and we have something religious based rather than culture based. Now, care in the last 48 hours of life, we cannot count it, but what we mean is एकदम end stage पे, that is what is called as palliative care, and that is very, very crucial. And that is the time when these discussions that we are having, those discussions come very important. Now, as I was telling you, disclosure of diagnosis and information. A doctor faces this problem, whether he should disclose to the patient or not. Now, he does not know the patient's mental setup. You may be very strong otherwise, but when it comes to information that you are having terminal stage cancer, it's a rude shock and you can't take it. Some persons might die just out of hearing it only. So that is why the doctors usually, am I right, Dr.
Yes.
Shiva? They usually disclose it to the nearest relative or the family members, and they ask whether you want to disclose it, whether you want me to disclose or whether you want to disclose it to the patient. So disclosure of diagnosis and information is something your religion doesn't come up, but your family. Your family members. That again is not a question of philosophy. Philosophically देखो, it is informed consent की भी यहाँ जरूरत नहीं है. So you should disclose or you should not disclose. But no, it is family which has to decide the mental makeup of the patient whether to disclose or not to disclose. I'll come back to this point once again later. So what we require is a new philosophy of care, which considers a new philosophy of care which considers these separate situations separately and decides as to how are we to disclose, how are we to handle these terminally ill cases. Now, coming to the meaning of the word palliative care, and what is the meaning of palliative care? Palliative care is actually a multidisciplinary approach. We have a terminally ill case. We have to decide what do we mean by terminally ill. जो कैंसर से खाली कैंसर डिक्लेयर हो गया, so does he become terminally ill, or is he in the last stages, or someone who's unconscious, who is in a permanent vegetative state? Only that person is going, or who's brain dead. Will I call that patient as terminally ill? Whom do we call terminally ill? You know that there are many cases who have been cured of cancer. Even after the doctors have declared last terminal stage. So a religious person may not consider this case as terminally ill. There's always a hope. There's always a hope. So we would say, ठीक है, you declare him as terminally ill, I don't consider this as terminally ill. So that is why the definition of terminally ill also changes from culture to culture, from family to family, from patient to patient. Palliative care is a multidisciplinary approach to specialized medical and nursing care. It's not only medical but also nursing care. Now this nursing care is given by the family members or the community. So it is an approach of the medical and nursing care for people with life-limiting illness. Life-limiting illness. The focus here is on providing relief from symptoms. Now which are the symptoms? Pain, physical stress. The moment you hear or the moment you are suffering from a disease, there is a physical stress, there is a mental stress and also physical stress. Physical stress, the pain, etc. But इसके साथ accompanying mental stress is also there. Now this mental stress is not only to the patient, it's also to the family. That is why you will find that when it comes to palliative care, it's not only provided to the patient but even to the family. Now there are certain palliative care units, either the patient is transferred there, for example for cancer we have CIPLA cancer treatment, not treatment but palliative care unit. Or you may be provided palliative care at home. The patient may be provided at home. And you know, I still remember my sister died of cancer. So it was Diwali time. They knew that she cannot have any fruits because she was at the last stages. But they brought fruits and mithai for the family, just to cheer up the family. That's a little, that time I did not understand that why have they brought for the family. And we were, you know, you may be able to afford. It's not a question of whether you can afford it. It's a question of someone who's caring for you. What is required is a care. And it's not only care of the patient, but even palliative care is required by the family members. Because there is stress, the moment the patient is diagnosed of a certain terminal disease, stress comes up in the full family and even friend circle. What is the goal of palliative care? The goal is to improve the quality of life. And usually we talk of palliative care only when, the goal is not treatment. Goal of palliative care is not treatment, it is reduction of distress. Now this reduction of distress could be by different ways, I'll come to it. How we could do it, either by prayer healing or by discussions. You know, sometimes now I know of one family, the Chinese they are, their system of prayer is not the way we pray. What they do is they have discussions. Now one method of is meditation. Chinese are Buddhists. So one is meditation. Now these people don't have that meditation system. They have a discussion. So it could be either that way. So that is called as community healing, community prayer and healing to that. Or it could be direct, a personal, or the person might himself, like I know in my family, there's one person who's at the last stages, he doesn't want to meet people. He says, let him be in prayer, don't disturb him. Even his own grandchildren, his own son, if they would go and meet him, not more than 3-4 minutes. He will like them. All the way a person travels from India to US and goes and meets him, he doesn't want to meet the person, 3-4 minutes. He says, I'm in my last stages, don't come and disturb me, let me be in prayer. So it all depends on, it could be a personal, it could be a community prayer. Palliative care is provided by nurses, physicians or doctors, healthcare providers. Now who are these healthcare providers? You know, in the palliative care units, sometimes the family or the attending physician may not be there. Because now they find that now the patient doesn't need active treatment because nothing can be done. So in that case, it is the healthcare providers. For example, you need to start the drip, you need to stop the drip, you need to give food in the form of liquid, they call as food packets, which is given just like you give the saline. Now, all these things that are given, I don't know what are they called? What are these food packets called? We laymen just use the word food packets. With cancer patients, so it's not internally.
Internally?
Intravenous, sorry.
Parental nutrition.
Yeah, parental, they call parental?
Parental.
Parental, okay. Parental
Enteral is
nutrition.
through the,
No, I mean this way,
so the IV is parental. So through
parental,
intravenous.
okay, parental nutrition. Now these patients cannot digest anything, they cannot even take water. The terminally last stage, the terminally ill last stage patients. So they are given parental nutrition in the sense that जैसे drip होती है glucose की या saline की वैसे ही this is given to them. Now all these things is done by the healthcare providers. You don't necessarily need the attending physician for these things. So you have the nurse, you have the attending doctor, you have the specialist doctors, you have the family members, then you have the community, which plays a very big role. It all depends on whether the person wants community or the person wants just the family or wants no one. Depends on the mental state of the person. Like I know my sister, she never wanted anyone to go and meet her. She was a principal of a school and a college. She said, I don't want anyone to come and meet me. I would rather prefer that in the school they pray for me rather than come here. She didn't want anyone to see her in that weak state, and she felt that that's it, and she would be in prayer rather than some coming and talking. They don't do. Some want talking in discussions, some don't want. So you have to see what the patient wants. Now this palliative care could either be in the hospital, home, or community palliative care programs. By community, it could be Jain community, Sikh community, Hindu community, or it could be something like the Siddha Foundation, which has, this palliative care unit. So it could be anything. What the patient requires and what the family requires is psychosocial and spiritual support. Now see, what is done here is psychosocial. There is no philosophy, there is no medical here. It's only psychosocial and spiritual. Because medicine has raised its hand. The doctors come, they support. Because without the doctor, till the last moment, you want that the doctor should be coming. You know what the doctor says, मेरा कोई बोल नहीं. पर हमें वो comfort ही नहीं आता जब तक वो doctor नहीं आए. And you may be having a family doctor. I had a family in which we had 3 doctors. Still we wanted an external doctor who would come and say कि ये करो ये नहीं करो. Decision हमने खुद लेना है. Like the doctor came and told us, stop that food packets and stop eating drips. We didn't listen to him. But we want that they should be coming at least once or twice a day and giving us social, psychological support. Medications and treatments are said to have palliative effect if they are not having curative effect. If they are having curative effect, then we don't say they are having palliative. Palliative means not curative, but just थोड़ा distress reduce किया जाता है, pain reduce किया जाता है, sedation reduce होती है. Now when we talk about palliative care, this differs from culture to culture, amongst traditions, or say from religion to religion. Now I say culture to culture because even say within Christianity you will be having different factions. Even within Hinduism you will have different factions, so maybe it differs, maybe it's the same. But religiously, definitely I feel that there is a difference between Semitic and non-Semitic, and sometimes even within, for example, we have a difference in the Jain way of looking at terminally ill patients and the Sikh or the Hindu way. I wouldn't be able to comment on the Hindu, but I know definitely that the Jain and the Sikh way of treating patients or handling these patients is totally different. Now Santhara is not accepted. And I think even in Hinduism, we wouldn't be accepting a thing like euthanasia or Santhara or Sikhism. It is not. We would rather prefer that the patient continues. I mean, religious people, I'm talking about religious people, we will not mind the patient suffering. We will not like to end the patient's life. So we have differences among Sikhs, Hindu, Jain, Buddhist, different traditions. The key ethical issues in clinical practice in palliative and end-of-life care need to be seen, and how these issues are influenced by culture. That's what we will be seeing now. Religion plays a major role in a person's life and death and health matters. We will see that even when a child is born, usually religion plays a big role. Very few, I mean, I have not come across, there would be some, but there are very few people who would do away with the religious practices when the child is born. There may be none, there may be some. But kuch to like in ours, we don't have too many, but definitely kaano mein, take the name of God, that's the minimum that we would be having. Then naming ceremony, these are minimum things, where we, kitne bhi hum philosophical kyun na ho, and we may not be ritualistic, still a few rituals do enter into our life. Similarly, when it comes to death and health matters, religion plays a very important role. And a patient's autonomy makes it mandatory for doctors like Dr. Shiva, for the medical and healthcare providers to consider a patient's religious affiliations. We cannot treat a patient without considering the patient's religious affiliations. So however he wants, the doctor has to consider the autonomy of the patient. Now when it comes to withdrawing, what is required is whether we should withdraw treatment, whether we should withhold treatment. What the doctors will tell us is maybe it is medically futile. Now, could you just explain what do you mean by medically futile treatment? Rather than me telling you, would be a better person to tell.
Futility is when, we expect that the treatment that we do is going to have a positive effect on the patient. So, if the treatment that we are going to give is not going to have positive effect, so we would consider that treatment or intervention to be futile. So it's not working. And the term futility now, is not used as much because it kind of indicates giving up. And what we would use instead would be disproportionate treatment or inappropriate treatment. Okay. And so it is appropriate in certain circumstances. It's proportionate in certain circumstances. Whereas in a terminally ill patient, it becomes disproportionate and inappropriate. And this distinction between what would be appropriate and what would be inappropriate or what would be proportionate or disproportionate is something which is based on the facts of the case, the medical facts. So what the condition is, then how has the person responded to the treatment, and whether it will help or not. So it will be based on, say, research evidence. It may be based on the person's experience. And then, of course, using experience and this, he would apply that to the individual patient and then decide whether it's going to be beneficial or not.
And
so
also you would just comment on the others. Withdrawing, withholding treatment, nutritional feeding.
So
and,
these are all now terms that we've defined in medical terms, and they have very precise definitions. So withholding, withdrawing therapy, medical futility, these are all defined in we have a task force of the Indian Council of Medical Research, ICMR, and I was part of that, and it's going to be published now, probably next month. So I think it's in the public domain for people to comment on the ICMR website. And so these definitions, withdrawing therapy is, you've started some treatment, like for example ventilation, and now it's disproportionate or inappropriate or it is futile, so you say we'll withdraw. That's in simple terms withdrawing therapy. Withholding treatment is person has come with an illness which is not curable. Let us say for example lung cancer has affected the lungs. So both lungs are completely invaded by the cancer, and the person is not getting enough oxygen to breathe, and so he becomes breathless. So in this situation, you could put the patient on a ventilator, but it would be inappropriate to put the patient on a ventilator, and so you withhold ventilation. So in a terminally ill patient, you may decide to withhold giving compressions or CPR. So these would be all examples of withholding treatment. Nutritional feeding is an example of an intervention, like ventilation. And do not resuscitate orders would be an example of withholding therapy.
Now
I'm going to touch on these things.
Yeah, I thought you would be doing it, but still I just thought just to compliment what I was saying. Now here I would like your comments that and the comments of the house. Now when we talk about withdrawing and withholding, we usually have a problem. You know, when it comes to withholding, religiously we don't have much of a problem. Someone says, "Nahi, I don't want to go to the hospital, mujhe yahi rehne do." Yeah, you've gone to the hospital and he's the terminally ill stage. I still remember of a case when we told him that you please undergo surgery. He was a very important personality in the Sikh religious community. We said, "You have this project in hand, undergo surgery, at least you'll have 6 months to complete this and the community will be benefiting from you." He says, "I don't want this treatment." So what is he doing is withholding. Am I right? He's withholding. Withholding, usually we don't have much problem in Sikh community. I think same thing applies to Hinduism, but I would like you to comment on it. But when it comes to withdrawing, we are always hesitant. We don't want, because withdrawing would mean that you started life-saving therapies and now nahi is not going to respond. If you say, at least in Sikh tradition, they would believe that who knows what miracles will happen. So why shouldn't we continue with this? But अगर start नहीं किया है like in villages in India, tell me how many people can really get in the basic requirements? So उनके it is for as good as हमारे पास पैसे नहीं कहाँ जाके करेंगे? They cannot afford a helicopter from say a remote village and come to Pune for treatment. So it is just something like withholding treatment. ठीक है, we know it, but then nothing can be done about it. There we don't have a problem. Religious perspective. But we do have a problem with withdrawing, and that is why these considerations are coming up. Now the bill has been passed, am I right, on euthanasia? That is the passive.
Not yet.
Okay, it's still being discussed.
Not yet. It's introduced in Parliament.
It's introduced.
It's introduced in Parliament.
Okay.
It is still.
I didn't follow it up.
It's at the level of discussion being discussed.
I thought passive euthanasia was approved.
No,
not this.
In the context of the chronic persistent vegetative state, the Supreme Court gave very clear directions in the Aruna Shankar case.
That was one case.
So that holds as law at the moment.
Okay.
And that judgment spoke about passive euthanasia. Though, passive euthanasia is not a term that as doctors we would recommend because we feel it's an oxymoron. Yeah. So euthanasia, the current definition would be active shortening of the dying process. So you're saying passive active shortening. So it's an oxymoron. So it's a contradiction in terms.
But people like us would call withholding treatment as something like passive.
Yeah, so passive euthanasia would be withholding withdrawing therapy.
Yeah, withholding.
So withholding withdrawing therapy would be the appropriate.
More would be I think withdrawing.
Yes, and you are all philosophers and ethicists, but the distinction between there is no ethical distinction between withholding and withdrawing. Yes. Currently, at least it's controversial, but there has been a lot of discussion on this, so it's been debated world over. But all the guidelines, the ethical guidelines on end-of-life care, the American, the British, all of them are unanimous that withholding and withdrawing, though, like ma'am said that withdrawing therapy कुछ निकाल रहे हैं ऐसे लगता है, हम लोग कुछ कर रहे हैं हमको ऐसा लगता है, लेकिन ethically it is the same. So there is no ethical.
Philosophically it is the same, but spiritually or if you look at it mentally, I feel that we find it a bit easier to withhold than to withdraw. Mentally, philosophically there's no difference. As I told you, philosophically dying this year that way.
So for us, withdrawing is an important step, and we feel that it is the same because otherwise, sometimes when we are treating patients, we need to give a trial of therapy. We need to see if that therapy is going to work or not. At the beginning, like you said, you cannot directly say that it's not going to work. So in intensive care, we would like to give a trial of ventilation. So, if the situation is clear, like terminal cancer, then it's different. But if someone has come, say, with a infective process, let's say malaria, very bad malaria, and blood pressure is not alright, breathing is not alright, dialysis is required, patient is bleeding, hemoglobin is very low. So, if I don't give ventilation to this patient, he is going to die as soon as he reaches the hospital. So, it's part of rescue and of giving treatment that I will put him on the ventilator. Yeah. So, at that point, I think that it is appropriate therapy. And unless I give this trial, I won't know. So then I say, in 48 hours I'm going to try this. And then I know that from our literature that after 48 hours, if we find that 3 or 4 organs are not working and blood pressure is not coming up, and otherwise patient is not doing well. So then at that point we would say that here it's become disproportionate or inappropriate, and then we would withdraw. So, so withdrawing, is an equally important thing, and we need to think of it as the same ethically. That's my view as well. But I'm not very conversant with the debate, between the.
Now here I would just like to add one point, considering the religious feelings. What he says is right, that if we do not start the treatment, that especially when it is possible, you have the money, you have the funds, or the community is bearing, or you have an insurance, and when it is possible, it's better to give it a try. And then afterwards, if need be, we should withdraw. Now, when it comes to the religious people, non-Catholic traditions would perhaps accept this withdrawal. I don't know what would be the response of the Hindus and the Sikhs. Now, I'll just speak of the Sikh tradition. Now, what I feel is when it comes to the Sikh tradition, your way, I would fully agree that we give it a try. And afterwards, we need to remember that this body is just one, जैसे हम लोग कहते हैं ना, एक ड्रेस है जो हमने पहना है, 84 लाख species में हमने जाना है, this is just one species in which we have taken birth. So let's not, take it कि भी नहीं, किसी हालत में भी हमने, we should preserve this. And Sikhism is based on the concept of seva. Sikhism is based on the concept of concern for the others. So now, many a times, in fact in India most of the times, and I am especially from the army background, wherein treatment to our relatives and others is free. We don't even need to pay. So I would want that this treatment continue ki jaye. Even though the doctors are saying that it is inappropriate, does not, I will again use the word futility as he has pointed out, that it is inappropriate, it's not going to benefit the patient. But I would normally want that we continue because I am not even paying. And in the army, basically ICU patients, you don't have to be there. यहाँ तो वैसे कोई प्रॉब्लम भी नहीं, so we want कि नहीं जितना भी रखा जाए, जितना नहीं पेशेंट को रखा जाए, ICU में वो रहे. बाहर तो फिर भी खर्चा आता है, तो we think कि whether we should continue or not. But I feel that this is again my interpretation of the Sikh tradition. What I feel is that according to Sikh tradition, if I am occupying that bed, I am depriving someone else who could much faster recover. Like when I was preparing all this yesterday, I told my children that in case I happen to go into such a situation, and it's always better to give advance directives, like in case of Terry Shia, advance directives were not there. So they were not able to decide. Husband wanted to withdraw, family members, mother and daughter did not want to withdraw. So what I feel is that we need to give advance directives and write it, tell our family members that whether you would like to continue with the treatment when the treatment is not really going to be beneficial, 1. 2, okay, there is a chance that you might survive, a miracle might occur. But I would say, I may not be depriving someone else, I am past 70, 80. I may not depriving someone else who may come. If you remember, जब हमारी clinical mediation की workshop हुई थी, so there were cases which we discussed that there's one young person and one very rich 70 plus old person who is even drinking. So he's got liver cirrhosis, and this young person, this young lady has just met with an accident. So whom should you give preference? That rich person or this young lady? So similarly, we need to consider and give advance directives that if the medical treatment is disproportionate out of seva, out of concern for the others, out of concern, not only myself but concern for the others, I would rather, or say a person has brain death, in which case very less chances that more than 48 hours the patient is going to continue. So I would rather prefer that my organs are donated than I be kept alive and till my respiratory system fails, I should be kept alive. So this is what I feel is a Sikh concept. Yeah,
so ma'am, from the Indian traditions, Sikhism or Buddhism or Hinduism, all of them, because of the concept of rebirth and this, they are very, very amenable to both withholding and withdrawing. So what ma'am has said is that, seva bhav, and so it talks about, and in modern terms it would speak about equality, equity and fairness.
Right.
Yeah. So distributive justice, I mean, you'd say, why should I deprive someone else of where it may be more useful? Of course, that judgment is based on what the doctor is going to say, but it's an important thing, and therefore, even though the West, they speak about this, in India, people are very, very, very open to withholding and withdrawing. So I don't think between Sikhs and Hindus, and there is a difference. I'll tell you where the difference comes, but we will discuss that a little later. But I think the Hindu, as a Hindu, or I'm not exactly Hindu, but Hindu, Buddhist, whatever, Indian traditions are mostly amenable to
Withholding.
all types of end of life.
Yeah.
There is no, as far as I know.
Would you say all types? I think active we wouldn't accept. Active euthanasia,
It's just another step.
it's a hastening.
Yes,
Which
it's just
we-
another.
At
It's
least
just another step.
spiritually, at
Yeah.
least the Sikh tradition would not accept.
Would not
active.
accept. It's just another step, but I don't think we should get into that because we're not going to get into active euthanasia. In any case, in India, maybe the time is not right. But I would agree. I would agree that withholding, withdrawing, I don't see any problem.
When it comes to active, we are not really amenable to accept this because when it comes to active euthanasia, we are actually, see, there's another point that I'd like to convert here. Active euthanasia is something in which you're giving morphine or very high doses of sedation. We are a little reluctant to do this. But when it comes to giving a little higher, I'm not talking of ekdam high for euthanasia or for the death doctor. When it comes to giving a little higher dose of sedation, this is another point that we need to see whether religious people are acceptable, amenable to this. Non-Catholics do accept, Catholics are reluctant. But when it comes to Sikhism and Hinduism, whether we are ready, I'm again saying since I and Dr. Naveen, we are taken up, so I thought he would be taking up the Hindu perspective and I'll take up the Sikh. That's why I'm speaking of two religions. It would be most welcome if you all can give me the Jain and the Buddhist perspectives also. Now what I feel is that when it comes to sedation, I was talking about sedation. Now when it comes to sedation, pain ho raha hai, you can make the person unconscious by giving him a higher dose of sedation. And when the patient becomes unconscious, he is not under pain. You now give him active euthanasia, but a little higher dose of sedation. The Spanish culture doesn't have any problem. The European culture doesn't have any problem. Non-Catholics don't have a problem. Catholics would not accept. Now, I don't know whether Hindus and the Sikhs would accept it. I feel that a little higher dose of sedation may be acceptable, but definitely total unconscious karna, ताकि pain ना हो. I was thinking no, but while coming on the way again, I started giving a thought to it whether it should be a total no. I don't know, how would you respond to it? जैसे patient है, he is एकदम at the बहुत ज़्यादा pain हो रहा है. Cancer patient is having a lot of pain, right? Now you can either give him sedation such that he remains almost semi-conscious and doesn't have the pain.
So,
And you will tell us how exactly to go about it.
no. So again, this is very well described, and it's called the doctrine of double effect.
Yeah, Thomistic principle of double effect.
So it's called the doctrine of double effect, and in essence, the intent is to relieve the pain. It is not to cause it. Whereas in euthanasia, the intent is to cause death. Okay. So when intent is to relieve pain, now I cannot be sure of what dose is going to work for whom, isn't it? So if for someone, I think 5 milligrams is okay. For someone else 10 milligrams is okay. And I use 5 milligrams and that person has got an abnormal response to that sedative drug and he becomes unconscious or he dies, let us say. So does that mean that we have done euthanasia? No. We have given the drug to relieve pain. It was an unintended consequence. The occurrence of death was an unintended consequence. And so this doctrine of double effect has been well described, and it is described by a Catholic
Thomas Aquinas.
So Thomas Aquinas, and it is described and it has been used in UK law.
So this doctrine of double effect, what happens is that we, the Catholics also accept it, that our aim is only to sedate the person, but ठीक है, either death has occurred or some complications have occurred, it's okay. Our aim was only to reduce the pain. Now, I really don't know whether our traditions would accept it. I'll give you example from my own family. Now, when it was my sister, I knew she's having pain. We did give her a little bit, very little minor dose of sedation, but we did not really sedate her in the little proper sense. She kept having pain because, we believe, Indian tradition and Sikh specifically, we believe that ये जिंदगी जो मिली है नाम जपने के लिए मिली है, right? Now with that pain we have this saying in Sikhism, दुख दारू सुख रोग भया, कि जब दुख आता है तो उस समय God's name becomes the medicine. So you start taking God's name. So what I found is that although she didn't know much about what's happening to her, still all the time from her mouth she was uttering the slokas and Gurbani she was uttering. So if we had sedated her so that her pain reduces, you see she was having pain. And usually a religious person with more pain, the more, you pray hard and you're nearer to God. This is one. Others, just say, kya parmatma ne meri. There I feel you may sedate a little more. But there a person, so that's why I say your culture, religion, family, plays a big role. The patient. Now, the case that I'm saying in US, one of my relatives, he is ready to bear the pain. And he says, I want to pray, let me pray. That's what my sister did. That she was, I remember I told her, we pray so that we're cured. We'll all get community prayer. That, so that you will be, and we know so many cases, cancer cases that have been cured. She said, what will happen? Now again, it all depends on the individual. She said, what will happen? Don't I have to die? I have to die someday? You're only postponing my death. Let it be. Let me finish my karmas here only. We all believe in the theory of karma. So she said, let me finish my karma. It is my bad karma due to which I have to suffer. Let me suffer here so that I don't have to take rebirth to again undergo the same. So this could be one attitude. But there is another person who is not that religious, who is not able to bear the pain. सीधी बात है, हमें जब surgery होती है, we are having pain, one injection or one pill, you cry, you say, please give me one more. The nurse asks the doctor says, no, that might cause complications. But you keep pleading to the nurse that no, please give me, I'm not able to bear the pain. Because we don't know what's going to happen. And if the doctor says, no, this can cause complications, this koi baat nahi, mujhe ye pain so to chhudao. So this could be one attitude. Second could be like I told my sister or this person, I'm talking from my own personal experiences, that they feel that no, let it be, pain will bring me nearer to God. So, and now if you're unconscious, after that living, if you're totally unconscious, what is the aim or goal of this life? To pray, to be nearer to God, to be one with God. If we cannot, then I don't know. When we are unconscious, हमारे कर्म हम क्या करेंगे आप बताइए कि कैसे होगा वो हम कर्म हमारे भुगत रहे हैं नए कर्म तो हम कर नहीं रहे हैं तो क्या करना चाहिए ऐसे I will not tell you but we need to discuss that in our group.
What I think is that in case of Hindu patients, now the standard formula is not 8 epoch. We can look at it.
किसी religion में नहीं बोल
But
even on
we can
Sikhism
do
I
that.
am giving you my views on Sikhism not that our Akal Takht which is the supreme deciding authority has given any directives.
But we can do that and we can
Yeah,
do
we
that.
need to work out these. That's why I thought we would be having more of a discussion rather than just a one-way talk.
Like in Gita, it says Vasansi Jirnani Yathavya. That means we change our cells, we change our body. So the soul is eternal. Nainan Chandan Shastrani they say, soul is eternal one. But the body is perishing time to time. But that doesn't mean that body is totally undermined. Body is also, creation, body is also, the constituent of body are the sacred Panchamahabhuta. So yesterday I was listening to the lectures of Chausar who was giving some pre-medieval, practices. And they used to appeal with the mantras to all Panchamahabhuta in order to, create a sort of power to defeat the enemy. So, there are certain investigations or there might be certain beliefs in the early Hindu texts which are not available today to us. So, which might be, thinking very seriously about the Panchamahabhuta. So, in a way, Hindu tradition believes that when we die, Panchamahabhuta goes back to its own place or, So, the Prakriti is also considered as a sacred ultimate principle in Gita also and many places also. That is a holistically available. So from that point of view, we can develop a standard model. And again, there is a lot of diversity in Hinduism. In Vedanta itself, there are 5 schools. Then we have to identify whether the patient belongs to the Shankara Vedanta or Madhva Vedanta or Ramanuja Vedanta.
And I would say not only that, even if you belong to a particular tradition, where within the tradition there are no differences, still there may be one person who says that dukh daru sukh rog bhaya. कि जब दुख आता है तो परमात्मा का नाम दारू बन जाता है. There may be another patient who says मुझे परमात्मा का क्या करा है, मैंने ठीक नहीं होना है. He wants to pray so that he is recovered. So again, it depends on person to person, his capability or his level of spirituality. One person wants to accept the will of God, another doesn't want. You want to break or should I continue?
So, I'll just make a point here because it's an important thing. You will see that the 4 principles which ma'am showed, there will always be a certain degree of conflict between the principles. So here, the conflict, if you can see, is between, bearing the suffering or taking a painkiller. And if we are going to think of this as that individual person, the doctor is going to say that my painkiller is going to alleviate suffering. The patient, if he is asked, will say it's my situation, it's my belief, and so therefore I don't want the painkiller. Or he may say that I'm in severe pain, you please give me whatever painkiller you think is, or you do whatever is appropriate. That may be the approach. So if you're looking at the hierarchy of importance of the ethical principles, you could probably think of respect for autonomy as being above beneficence or non-beneficence. I mean, you can see that. Then the person can exercise his own autonomy.
Sometimes patients also ask for death.
That's a question of autonomy. That's what I'm saying. Autonomy.
So that's why the euthanasia part, even though religiously it would be unacceptable, but there may be people who may feel that it is acceptable for various reasons. So we are not getting into that, and we are not seeing whether it should be there or not there. But if we say that respect for autonomy is the highest principle at the moment, then the logical extension of that would be euthanasia. I mean, in future maybe.
Yeah, maybe passing a rule.
But not a rule. I mean, respect for autonomy is still there. I mean, you may not want.
You may not want.
I think in India it's mostly like we don't go by the legal euthanasia of passive euthanasia, but there are cases also where we practice passive euthanasia in the sense like when the doctor says that no, there's no chance, kind of thing, or when the patient is under this oxygen and he's unconscious or she's unconscious, then usually the relatives decides and they ask the doctor to pull out the life support. Right? So it's not legally we do it, but in certain cases we also do a passive euthanasia, not strictly adhering to the very definition of that, but that cases are also very strict.
But ethically you would agree, not legal. I mean,
Because
there is no law. But would you say that it is ethical to?
So I think it's ethical in the sense when we do philosophically, because the autonomy of the individual is also very important.
I think when we consider, as you had rightly pointed out, question of justice comes up. That I consider, or the family considers, that so and so is, we can afford. But there are others who are needing this bed. And there are limited resources everywhere, in every country. Even in places like US where the population is much less, still the resources are limited. So that ICU bed which is being used, all the facilities that are being used.
No. So here it is between is it ethical to continue then? I mean, is it ethical to continue? Because I am saying that it's not going to help. This patient is going to die. So is it ethical for me to continue the therapy?
It is ethical to continue until the patient wants it or the family member wants it.
No, I'm bringing up a different point because I'm saying that as a doctor, my aim is not to preserve life at all costs. My aim is to preserve life if possible and alleviate suffering and comfort if that is not possible. Yeah. So I have got two conflicting goals in my mind, and if in my mind it is clear that alleviation of suffering is my goal, then I would consider, or I might feel, as a conscientious doctor, that it is not ethical to continue. I'm just bringing it up.
Now this is one attitude. Second attitude could be that especially when you are not taking someone else's resources. The patient is at home or a community palliative care center where there is place for the others also. There you might think to continue. When it comes to justice and the patient is in ICU, I think we need to have different considerations. And when the patient is at home, considerations will be different.
So,
And as a doctor, you can see now how he is contradicting Kantian principle. My aim is not to preserve life at all costs. Because today, we cannot have that preserving life at all costs for a doctor. Because there are so many artificial means of preserving life.
Right.
So they have to consider it from different principles. And those principles also I feel are culturally bound religiously bound. And individual autonomy plays an important role. Even within religion, individual autonomy plays an important role.
Those patients
Am I right?
who are in coma especially, regarding them, what do you think?
Regarding?
What is your view and what is your view?
Patients
Those
in coma.
patients, due to wrong treatment or whatever it is, the effect is those who are in coma. What about them, please? What both of you think about it? I mean, your angle and from her angle.
Ma'am, you want to respond first? She's saying that patient is in coma.
I just now mentioned that when a patient is in coma, even if there is a chance of, like, 8-10 दिन 1 महीना 2 महीने निकल गए हैं, and even if there is a chance that some miracle might occur from the Sikh tradition, from the point of seva, I feel that we should not continue. I'm talking Sikh tradition. I'm not talking of any other tradition.
And what about you, doctor?
So,
He would of course medically.
when you have
Especially this opinion is now just before.
ethical to continue or not, yes. So, when I'm going to consider any of these issues, if I'm to give an ethical roadmap, yeah. So first would be to look at the facts of the case. Yeah. So what are the facts of the case? What does this coma mean?
And whether there's a chance of revival.
Yes. So is it completely irreversible, or is there a chance that it may reverse? Yeah. So I'm looking at the facts of the case, and then after the facts of the case now will be the 4 ethical principles, and of the 4 ethical principles, the uppermost will be the respect for autonomy. So therefore, I might say that the option here is, I am feeling that it is not ethical to continue. Yeah. But I am not the person to decide. Yeah. So here it has to be shared decision making. Now, as a doctor and as if I feel that it is not ethical for me to continue, I can say that, look, I am sorry, I can't continue in this fashion. But I'll find you an alternative doctor who will be willing to do this. Yeah. So, but still, respect for autonomy would be the first. I would not on my own decide to pull or yeah. So that would be the thing. Now, in an unconscious patient, autonomy ka baat hai. So if the person is conscious, then they can decide. But then if the patient is unconscious, who decides?
Autonomy of family.
So that substituted judgment.
Otherwise, if we are sensible enough, now that we are conscious, we should write a will or inform our family members. We shouldn't be scared. Each one of us has to die. How we will die, we don't know. We should make it clear to our family members. Write a will, make it clear that if some such situation arises, how, then the autonomy comes in.
So this is the most controversial part of the bill, if I were to tell you. This is the most controversial part of the bill, and it is the thing on which it got stuck. So I don't know whether you all had a look at the Times of India, December 18th, and Lies will invite 10 years of rigorous imprisonment and 1 crore fine for doctor if it is found that he has misrepresented the facts of the case. And
So no doctor will ever...
So they say that yes, then you can write, for example, advance directive is not legal. We cannot write it. I might write it down. I might tell my son, "Ki Baba, see, this is what I want, and I'm writing it down and I'm giving it to you." I might tell my lawyer as well, but I must tell you that it is not legal at the moment.
Okay, that's not legal.
It's not legal. Where is it legal? Advance directives are not legal in India. they carry great value. They carry great value because it expresses the person's wish. And we have already said that on an ethical principles basis, the most important principle is respect for autonomy. So you have to respect it. So I am not bothered whether it's a legal thing for advance directive or not. I am going to say that it is ethical. If the person has written it down, and since respect for autonomy is my first aim, I would respect that. But you know, this thing about writing down and that's the reason why there is so much controversy, because people may be coerced into writing it down, and then people may misuse it. So these are all the things which,
And another thing
unfortunately, the
that
judiciary is most concerned about this.
you may write it down not really autonomously. You are being maltreated by your family members. So you don't want that maltreatment. And they're saying, हमें इतनी मुसीबत पड़ रही है तुम्हारे लिए, we have to do so much for you वगैरह. And he says, अच्छा ठीक है, I'm writing it down. ठीक है, put an end to my life.
Yeah, but as far as the autonomy is concerned, if you take the Hindu point of view, specifically Gita point of view, then there is no autonomy in Gita, because even Arjuna is asked by Sri Krishna that for you to decide what to do. It is already decided by your karma. So dharma principle actually minimizes that.
Karma decides, but you also have freedom to create new karmas, isn't it?
That's
So फिर उसमें आना
So,
चाहिए autonomy.
so it's not entirely deterministic. Gita is not deterministic in that sense. I mean, you can't take away your path, but you can definitely at this moment change your
There is one shloka in the end of the Gita somewhere that after the same all Gita, we have told that Yata Ichchesi Tata Karo. I told all things.
I told you everything. I'm giving you all the wisdom. Yeah, maybe जो करना है. So that really gets autonomy.
It is a limited autonomy. Or we should say it's a limited freedom. Or limited determinism, call it either way. Now, there are two things. One is I give you a break, or just continue for another 10-12 minutes and we wind up.
Ma'am, you finish your I think we will not interrupt now.
No, this is really making my presentation simpler. In the 18th century, I've already said this. This is one point. That, today we use the word palliative care. In the 18th century and earlier, the word used was hospice. And when you use the word hospice, it felt, the feeling was that nobody at home is really looking after the patient, and therefore he's put in a hospice. So it determined something like an orphanage or ऐसे कुछ. अभी भी, at least within the Sikh tradition, हम लोग ना we are making old age homes and all, but whosoever comes and tells that we'll make old age homes or palliative care centers, we are told, why can't you look after the patient at home? शर्म नहीं आती तुम्हें? पैसे मांग रहे हो लोगों से palliative care centers बनाने के लिए? Why shouldn't the family members look after? That's the way in which in Maharashtrian culture I have not found that, but at least in our Sikh culture we are not quite comfortable with palliative care units or old age homes, and we liken them to hospice, which actually is nothing else but palliative care. लेकिन आजकल उसका जो connotation है ना, it is something like hospice inpatient in Spain still denotes extreme poverty or orphanage. And why Spain? I think in India also we have the same feeling. And even palliative care, at least within the Sikh tradition, ज़्यादा करके it's looked down upon. They say let the family provide the palliative care, but not community palliative care units. Now, pain relief and sedation versus euthanasia. Higher percentage of sedation is given due to family distress and a psychological distress of patient. And we may not mind a higher, and we've already discussed this issue, that we may not mind a higher sedation even from a religious perspective. कि ठीक है वो नहीं सह सकता है. And as he says, it might even result into complications. Then religious traditions role, acceptance of pain relief to the patient of sedation, even if it may result, ये तो पक्की बात है, it results into acceleration of death. Whenever sedation is given and higher dose of sedation, it is resulting into acceleration of death. Usually, religious traditions do not object to it. I may be wrong, you can correct me. We do not mind, अगर pain नहीं सहा जाता, तो we don't say it is irreligious to give higher dose of sedation.
So, and I would say that it is, may result.
May result, not at all.
Not always, not always. And now modern sedative drugs are extremely safe. Modern pain relieving medications, and their doses have been well defined. In fact, palliative care or palliative sedation, palliative pain relief is extremely well defined, and it is designed to provide comfort and not cause death. So it's a one in many patients who may have acceleration of death. It's not common.
And so much so that, you know, the sedation, like, I don't know, maybe we are having it in India, but in the US, they give so much of sedation that जैसा surgery हो रही है, जब तक surgery हो रही है, तब तक sedation is there. Within 20 minutes, the patient comes out and he can go. He's sent home. If there are not going to be further complications. So इतना, do we have a monitored here also?
Of course, we have all the.
So
we have
that
everything that
monitoring is done to such an extent that within 20 minutes they are able to decide matlab you can come into the normal state. It's only during that period that your surgery or your procedure is scheduled. Now if so much, and even when you're out of your procedure room, they keep monitoring it slowly, they keep reducing it. So the chances are very less, but it's a question of principle of double effect. It might result into death. I've already discussed this. Informed consent is not an issue where you decide to withhold diagnosis information. Now something about this. Unconsciousness, sedation could be induced by giving painkillers as she was telling, or it could be disease induced. You might go into a state of unconsciousness because of disease. Now the Spanish culture considers it to be the best way out to remove a patient from pain. But we can decide, as we've already discussed, whether and how much of sedation and how much should we put the patient into a state of unconsciousness and not let him suffer the pain at all. I feel that we should let the patient become conscious. Thoda pain ho raha hai, lekin at least he will remember God. But it all depends on individual cases. I told you that in Sikh tradition, it brings us nearer to God, makes one stronger and brings one nearer to God. The physician will never intentionally provoke the patient's death. It's a question of human dignity. This we discussed already. The ways of coping with terminal disease is either sedation, as we just now discussed, non-disclosure of diagnosis. This is what I want to discuss. This is the last point that we need to discuss. You know, some families decide not to disclose to the patient. So the patient thinks that ये pain जो है, it's a temporary pain and that he will come out of it after some time. Or else the patient says, I don't want to be told. I don't know when I'm going to be born. The time of being born is not known. Similarly, I don't need to know the time of my death. It's near, abhi hone wali hai. Because you know, a child is born at the 8th month, 7th month also, 8th, 9th, 9 plus. You don't know. Roughly say na. So similarly, the patient might say, don't disclose to become a jana hai. That could be patient autonomy. Second is a patient might say, nahi, it's better that I know it, at least now I can plan out and forget dunyavi cheezein Paramatma ka naam le. Or if he's a social worker, I know I'm going to die, so let me hasten my social work so that it can be completed. Or let me assign it to someone else who can really look after it. So this disclosure of diagnosis or non-disclosure of diagnosis could be either based on culture. Usually it is the family that takes a decision and takes a call as to whether it should be disclosed or not. Prayer healing could be personal. It could be community. Community prayers also have big effect in the healing process. And at least in the Sikh tradition, and I'm sure in the Hindu tradition and other traditions, where people get together and pray for, either get together or you could, individually at your homes, 20, 30, 40 people, yeah, roz ke 5 log pray for the healing of this person. So that's also one way in which you can offer palliative care to the patient. And one way of coping with the distress that is caused to the family and to the patient due to the terminal disease. Usually a family member is informed about patient's diagnosis. This we already discussed. Need to accept death as inevitable, accept God's will, and that would help us to better cope up with the terminal disease. This also discussed. That's it. So, from my side, I have given my points. If you have anything to ask,
context of diagnosis or disclosure or non-disclosure of diagnosis, you said that the question of informed consent doesn't arise. I agree that the question of informed consent doesn't arise when there is when there is no active intervention. But ethically, I think when we talk about the autonomy of the patient, the autonomy entails a right to know if the and I'm sure Dr. Shiv will be able to give us more insights on this. But even when it comes to disclosure and non-disclosure of the diagnosis to the patient, if the patient is in a state of is conscious, I still think that ethically one is bound to inform the patient.
See, when I said this was a legal statement. Ethically, I fully agree with you. That ethically, informed consent is required. Or rather, I would say that the patient should be informed. Or at least the family should be informed and let the family decide whether they want to inform them. So, what I was meaning is, legally the doctor is not bound, or you cannot sue the doctor that you didn't inform the patient. Am I right, Dr. Shiva?
I'm not sure about the legality, but again, if you consider the four ethical principles, the first is still respect for autonomy, and therefore, if the family does not agree to disclose or says that he would be devastated, then all efforts should be made to convince the family that whatever level of information the patient may choose to have, that level of information should be given. So, in talking to patients, you will often find out whether they want to know more. So, if you ask them open-ended questions, is there anything else you would like to know? What are you thinking of? So, then they will come up with what they're, and then in an appropriate manner, you can disclose the diagnosis. And personally, if you ask me, I think it helps to prepare for what to do. And then I'm able to exercise my autonomy in the fullest way. But if I'm not told at all, and so therefore, when many family members in India, it's very common, and this is a phenomenon which is described in palliative care as collusion.
What's it called?
Collusion. So the healthcare professionals and the family collude to not let the patient know. So there he is in the dark, and he usually has an idea. You go into a big hospital and you go to the cancer ward, and then you tell him, I'm not going to tell him that cancer is there. So it's something like that. So internally they know, but he says that why should I disturb my family members? Family members say, "Humko malum hai, lekin why should we disturb him?" And they spend the most important part of the communication which should be there in darkness, not required. So I think, ma'am, even though legally it may not be binding, all effort should be made to.
Morally, it is binding. I agree with you.
Morally, absolutely, and it's there is this thing I've read about telling lies. So if
hiding is also telling lies. Hiding is also telling lies.
Yeah. So if everybody chooses to do that, and everybody chooses to do that, then will society be worth living in? It's a Kantian. Yeah, it's a Kantian system. So it's an absolute in that sense. If man is the legislator of his own morality, then disclosure is paramount.
There is one thing I would like to add on palliative care. It's something I've come across on the internet that due to the higher number of homelessness in US, there are a number of cases where patients usually die alone. So there is this initiative by a small group of individuals who come together, and it is named as No One Should Die Alone. So whoever is in the last stages of their life, the volunteers usually go to them during the last 48 hours or as such period of their life, and they provide emotional or social support. Means like the main initiative is to hold hands while the person is dying, so that they won't feel that they are dying alone and lonely. So this is one thing that they are initiating in a very individual or very small scale this thing. That is one I think point in palliative care I came across a few days ago.
Yeah, and in fact in the US usually people are insured, so much so that even nursing care for a few hours is provided to the patients at home. And they do have and these people are even taken, if they are in a position, they have the community palliative care centers, other places where they are taken and they are given physiotherapy and other things. So there's a lot of care care taken for these people, but those who are not insured, it's very difficult. And in fact, I would say even those that are insured, we just came across families. Now, one lady, she was a doctor herself. She said that my mother was, she was in a palliative care unit. She called once, twice she rang the bell. They would not come and attend to her. So then she told her son that you please fix hidden cameras. It's not legal, but you fix hidden cameras so that you will know what is being done to me at my end stage. And within about a few days, she rang the bell, nobody came. Then after some time, the nurses came and they started laughing. They didn't attend to her. Then she kept crying. Then they called the van, ambulance. And even after the ambulance came, after 15 minutes, they sent her and she died on the road. So these things, where volunteers are working, they really work out. But when it comes to the government schemes, everywhere situations are bad. We think India is bad, US and Canada know better. It's similar. Not too bad, but it is bad there also. Baki volunteers even in India, they are working. Any other question?
Regarding the psychiatric treatment, so can we put them in the section of terminally ill cases? Because
No, they are not terminally.
because I have seen like people taking psychiatric medicines till their death or for such a long period.
That's a chronic illness, right?
And if they do not take medicine, then their behavior changes, and the people staying with them might face few cases. Might face few difficulties. So I just wanted to know about that.
So what's your question?
Yeah.
Can we term them as terminally ill?
So
Psychological.
mental illness or psychological illness.
Some kind of mental disorder.
Extreme
You
mental
can't,
disorder.
you can't make such a broad distinction. Within mental illness, there are so many other illnesses. So, in fact, you would think of someone who is mentally ill as someone who is highly vulnerable. The entire issue of consent, of autonomy, of who will decide for them if they fall ill. So all these things are very major ethical issues. And so certainly, if I were to give a yes or no answer to this, I would say definitely not. So I mean, it's like saying that I am born now and I'm going to die sometime. So then birth is a terminal illness, isn't it? Yeah. And then I can say that food and water are drinks. And nutrition in order to, so if I withhold and withdraw, I stop eating and drinking water, then I'm going to die, no? Or breathe, not breathe. So in that sense then, so therefore, mental illness as a broad thing, definitely not. And you should think of mental illness as a highly vulnerable category of patients.
Yeah.
I hope it answers the question.
So, but why we are not paying enough attention to these sorts of disorders or diseases?
See,
Here it's not
supposed to be
No.
My point is that
Let's restrict to what we are supposed to be doing.
No, what's your point? Let him
So
finish.
what he's trying to say is that why we don't take care of this
see, when we talk about the terminally ill cases, so I think where a person is suffering a disease for a long time and probably till that person cannot be cured from that disease. So when we come towards the cases of psychological illness or mental illness, I have seen the cases where people continue to take the medicines prescribed by psychiatrists till their death.
So you say you want
But that's true for diabetes, hypertension.
They are controlled by
Terminal illness has an essentially physical aspect affecting organs internally.
It may
And where
affect
medicine
also.
does not have an effect, where medicine is no more having an effect, we are talking of that.
So
And
but in cases of psychological or mental illness,
temporary effect है ना उसका.
but the point is
Obviously,
that
I just like to say, I mean, there's no point in discussing this
Yeah.
issue now because we are discussing projects, and the project is about terminally ill cases. So there's no point in going into this
That's
discussion at this
standard
moment.
which I have remarked.
alright.
So you may discuss that in
We
a
can discuss
terminally
it at tea time
in a
lunchtime.
terminally ill patient. If the patient has got a
Standard.
psychiatric illness or mental
Yes,
illness,
there you can.
how are his rights going to be affected? What is the ethical position you take? Yeah, and certainly for these patients also, everything that applies to everybody else will apply.
See, I think in terminally ill cases we are just restricting our talk about the physicality of a person, where I want to bring the psychological aspect which lasts till the death probably of a person. So,
No, so see, I think it's an important point what you're bringing up. So our definition of terminal illness does not include a mental disorder. So, or for example, if I were to say death, our definition of death is very, very physical. Would you agree? Yes. Heart stops, brain stops. Yeah. Only then I'm dead. Whereas I may consider myself dead if I can't interact with the environment. Yeah, like Aruna Shamba, vegetative state. No input, no output. Then it takes away the essence of being a human being, isn't it? So, in degrees, a mentally ill patient may not be. We don't know what his alternate reality is or what world he's living in. And when medications are given to mentally ill patients, more often than not, they are given so that he fits into the frame of society. And so therefore I don't think you should think of that as different or separate. Does it answer your questions?
to some extent, I will discuss with you in lunch.
The problem is that when we are discussing even these principles and these cases, till very recently, psychological illnesses were not considered as illness or a disease at all. It's only now that they are doing. So, there will be a lot of discussions.
The mental health care bill is
mental health care का ज़्यादा है ही नहीं है अपने all over the world. It's hardly considered as a disease till recently. Now, of course, they are starting to consider. So there will be cases of terminally ill, psychological or psychiatric patients.
Since there are so many issues, I interrupt here. We have to stop this session.